What is infrastructure? Say it with me because it's going to be a theme that keeps on giving. Maybe it's like art and it's in the eye of the beholder. Maybe it's like porn and you'll know it when you see it. The truth is, if you're building a society, and Joe Biden sure is, anything is infrastructure if you message it right. Welcome back to the Huddle. We are glad to have you here for another session of Inner Circle Analysis. I'm joined by Marc Ross. Today, we're going to talk about all manners of things when it comes to infrastructure, the environment, foreign policy. Marc, gone are the days of the boring Biden presidency. It's been a little busy here in the nation's capital around the White House. Tell me, what do you think about what's been happening in the news?
Joe, go big Biden. Yeah, I mean, he's Mr. Infrastructure, and infrastructure means everything to everybody. He's moving forward. It's very exciting. He's trying to make it as bipartisan as possible, but I think at the end of the day, they're going to try to get through the House and the Senate the biggest possible package that they can, not only to improve America's infrastructure, but also to placate the various stakeholders and factions that make up today's Democrat Party. Everything from human resources, like taking care of elderly people, to rolling out more broadband across rural America, to building bridges and laying down railroad tracks. So pretty exciting. I think, we got a few more weeks of this, but all signs indicate that Biden is very serious and something's going to get through. It's just I think, a question of how big the package is at the end of the day.
I like this. Next week, we've got the first unofficial State of the Union address to Congress, which is going to be a big deal. It also marks the 100th day in office for President Biden. And this bipartisan agenda that he's trying to assemble, where it's going to have some Republicans supporting this infrastructure plan, it's definitely a debate that may lay the groundwork for the next 3 months, 6 months, 10 months. I'm not sure. But of course, it's not something that the president can do alone. He's been meeting with bipartisan groups, including Republicans. He's been approaching people who used to be mayors, people who used to be governors, trying to figure out how to take this infrastructure issue to the American people. And I one of the favorite things that I saw was that this question is, what is infrastructure? Well, infrastructure is anything if we like it. That means you can put it in the agenda if it's important to you. And so that's why the president is definitely courting people across the aisle. What do you think about this idea that even where Republicans are going to hate the idea of spending so much money, that there might be actually some wins on the table for them if they get their districts and their states on the president's agenda?
Yeah, I think this is a very high risk, high reward kind of situation, because clearly every district in America, every state has got some need for infrastructure. The question, as you just said, what is infrastructure? That's where it gets really challenging. Everybody's afraid to vote for a bridge to nowhere, and that's showing up in a campaign ad. Everybody's afraid to vote for midnight basketball or some kind of goofy after-school program that only serves a handful of people. These are the real challenges. When you have such a big piece of legislation, $2 trillion, which, by the way, is bigger than the economy of Russia, I mean, there's going to be some weird, goofy stuff in there. So that's the risk you take. But also, I can't see as a politician going back to your congressional district for election in 2022 and saying, hey, I didn't bring back the bacon. I didn't get that money for that bridge we wanted. I didn't get that, highway funding. That's where the real rub is. There's going to be a lot of stuff in here that people are going to want. But the risk, like I said, is what is in there, the fine print, the lines that, some carve out for some special program in some weird part of America that somebody might not be a fan of.
The president said he wanted big business to pay their fair share, and that he thinks that it shouldn't be on the backs of honest, good-earning Americans to have to fund fixing, like you said, railroad tracks and airports. And there are definitely the advancements towards the future, though, that are going to help. We know rural broadband is an issue that's come to the table when we forget oftentimes that outside of big cities, there are still people who struggle to connect to the internet in that always on nature that a lot of us have when it comes to accessing information. But not only that, there's also the pathway towards a better future when it comes to our climate infrastructure. This is going to be about clean water, clean air, which is going to directly affect our energy and transportation needs. Those are two secretaries from the cabinet who we talked a lot about, Jennifer Granholm and Mayor Pete Buttigieg. What do you think when it comes to how climate, and of course, we know that with Earth Day just upon us here, that this is the environment is going to be a big part of what shapes this agenda.
Yeah, in many ways, the environment, the climate change, and the infrastructure agendas, if you did a Venn diagram, they all come together. And I think there's no way that the Democrat Party is going to advance any kind of infrastructure spending that does not have green jobs, does not have more efficient ways for us to produce electricity, does not have ways to move us around the country quicker and faster and more efficient. So they all come together. And we've seen the mine workers of America are on board with this as long as they get job training. As we've heard, Joe Biden's been diligently working with the unions to get them on board. So it's not surprising. I mean, this is good politics. It makes sense. Like I said, there's a lot of stakeholders, a lot of factions, and there's gonna be a lot of money that's tossed around to make this come to fruition. At the end of the day, though, the question is, how big is the budget? What is in the actual legislation? And do we need a third kind of investment bill, a third kind of spending bill, maybe later this year?
I'm just floored really at the cohesiveness of how everything like a pretzel seems to play into everything. As you mentioned, jobs, as you mentioned, this is very much the build back better approach that Joe Biden promised. And now as we look at the American Rescue Plan, the American Family Plan, the American Jobs Plan, all these issues are coming together and they keep weaving into one another. Along with that, of course, part of that rescue is as we tackle COVID. We have recently passed that threshold from the president that all adults in the United States are now eligible for vaccination. We've been hitting about 3.2 million doses a day. But the risk that's at play now is, are we going to hit that vaccine wall where more people are resistant to the idea of getting vaccine than what we've got available? What do you think?
Yeah, it does seem like everybody who wants a vaccine can certainly get it now, which is fantastic. I think everybody who is in high risk has been able to access it. And, there's plenty of vaccination. There's plenty of vaccines. The question now is, how do we get, vaccine resistors, if you will, to do the right thing and get jabbed? The question now, is it a communications effort? Is it the president? Are there celebrities? Are there influencers? What's it going to take to get another 20% of our population to get the jab, and so we can all move forward? We've already heard from the Pfizer CEO, who's going to recommend that we're going to have to get a second jab 12 months out. The thing we don't know, the variants are moving so fast. We just don't know how long these vaccinations work, but we clearly know getting them is better than not getting them. So what that's going to take, or what kind of messaging, I think is going to be the big challenge. It is all part of the whole build back better. I think what's interesting about Joe Biden is, for me, he shows every indication he's not going to run for election. He's kind of liberated. He's a one-termer. Whereas you look back to Obama and George W., both presidents who lasted 8 years, they get distracted by various things for various events, but also they were almost like a bit too timid for whatever reason. They ran out of steam. Joe Biden, to his credit, and maybe I think he's got the best team around him. Every day he gets up and says, "What are we going to do to build back better?" Right? And does it check these 3 boxes, make it go forward? And COVID vaccination is part of that process as well.
Yeah, he is definitely not afraid of bold moves, even when we look at the things that could be, like you said, noted deterrents or possible political consequences. Well, sure, there have been some breakthrough cases. That's what we've seen in some of these health studies. But mathematically, it's so small compared to the amount of efficacy where the vaccine is working that this is where we have to keep pushing forward. Even with the pulling of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine out of the marketplace, and they expect in the next maybe few days or week, they are still pushing forward at a bold pace. And where that's going to take us next is, how do we help other countries try to reach the same level of vaccination as we do? The Biden administration is carefully plotting an undercurrent of foreign policy, and it's going to be the same kind of thing that helps you and I get on a plane and start traveling again, while other countries start to decide what their vaccine rules look like, or what their vaccine response looks like. Notably, France and I think Italy are starting to toy with the idea of opening up. They want to see who gets vaccinated, and they want tourists again.
Yeah, it was interesting. In the same time, as you rightly point out, Italy and France are making overtures that people that are properly vaccinated will be allowed to visit this summer and have an aperitivo along the Mediterranean, which is fantastic. But the same week, Boris Johnson was due to go to India to make a state visit there and had to cancel because what's happening in India is a complete disaster. Hundreds of thousands of people are contracting COVID every day. I mean, it is spreading rapidly around the rest of the world. The emerging economies of the world are really facing a huge challenge. Brazil, India, China has not made a lot of progress in vaccination. So that's the real challenge. As the economically developed world kind of moves forward, the OECD countries, we have to make strides to get this vaccination spread around the world to other emerging economies. That's going to be a huge challenge.
Even our neighbors to the north and south are struggling to keep up with our progress. Canada and Mexico not coming anywhere close. And so we know that Vice President Harris has said she will be making a visit to our southern border. She's going to go to Mexico. She's going to check out some of Latin America and try and go head on to some of the border surge crisis that is plaguing our southern border. And the question that a lot of people want to say is that where there was such heavy criticism of the Trump administration's policy and everything, has anything actually gotten better? Is it being swept under the rug as we see people trying to cross into the United States from Mexico?
Yeah, I know this is immigration is a huge challenge for a number of reasons. It's very interesting that Kamala Harris has been tasked with this. She'll be making her first kind of foreign independent trip, as you read out, to Mexico, to Guatemala, to kind of sort out this message. But it's a two-tier situation, and we got to talk about COVID vaccinations, we got to talk about immigration, economic development, infrastructure, climate. I mean, all these issues in some ways are coming to a head. And to Team Biden's credit, I don't think they're shirking from them. They're really going after them. Of course, they may not get it right every day, but to their credit, I think they deserve a tip of the cap because they're actually doing something. They're moving quite quickly and they're hitting the ground running. Even, Joe Biden had his first, official state visit from the Prime Minister of Japan last week, and he's going to invite the Prime Minister from South Korea. So, in some ways, like, this team is moving in 4 or 5 different levels. They're moving quickly. They're trying to accomplish a lot in a short period of time. And yeah, everybody's not going to be completely pleased. I mean, that's the nature of politics, that things aren't going perfectly, but you got to give them credit that they're moving quickly and trying to address the problems that I think have been languishing. Literally George W. Bush, Obama, Trump was a complete disaster. There are a lot of issues that need to be resolved, and Joe Biden, rightly or wrongly, is saying, I'm going to try to make a go at it.
Yeah, we saw the president meet with Prime Minister Suga from Japan at the White House. That, of course, is going to be important as the Japanese Olympics are coming down the line in less than 100 days, as we talked about on the last episode. But as well, there are so many trade issues. There are so many issues that come with our Asian allies. And this is going to be an important partnership to see what we can do in mainland Asia. Obviously, a lot of people are looking to Japan and Korea to stand up to China as things intensify when it comes to our business relationships, our political relationships there. But let's talk about one of those other areas where we're having some trouble. The U.S. had to expel Russian diplomats out of the United States and impose sanctions because of hacking. How is it that we keep fighting with Vladimir Putin, who, as you had pointed out just a couple episodes ago, helped secure himself more years in office?
I mean, Russia has been doing diplomacy and spycraft for a hell of a long time. They're really good at it. Frankly, it's their superpower. And it's interesting at the same time, Putin's going to show up at this climate summit that Joe Biden has organized this week. We're tossing out diplomats. It's like the Americans come to life. I'm actually, pro tip, there's a great show called The Optimist. It's actually a Russian show. It's on Amazon Prime about their spycraft in the early part of the 60s. I don't know. Russia, this is like what they have to do. They've got to play this asymmetrical war. They've got to do some goofy stuff on the spy side of the game. And it's very tit for tat, but they seem very relentless. We may throw out 10 diplomats, I'm sure they're sending 10 more in as we speak. So this is not going to go away anytime soon.
I like that asymmetrical label there. That is definitely what we're starting to see from the Biden White House, is that they're playing on more than one level at a time here. And I think that's what it's going to take. It is certainly coming at them from all directions, but we're going to get plenty of updates on what are priorities when the president addresses Congress next week. I know you have a great guest who's going to help us preview some of these challenges and agenda items. This is someone who actually had on at the very beginning of our program here in one of the first weeks. Tell me and remind our guests about Louise Schiavone.
Yes, Louise Schiavone was on the third episode of the Huddle when we had no idea what we were doing. Not that we have any idea what we're doing now, but she is our first return guest. She is an anchor with NPR Radio, and she is a professor at the Carey Business School at Johns Hopkins University, a real communications pro, somebody who's been in this town for a number of years. She's even got a good story about Fritz Mondale. I'm looking forward to this interview. Joining us, the first repeat performer, Louise Schiavone. She was with us back on episode 3 before Joe Biden was even sworn in, before the opening days of 2021. Louise, how's it going? Thanks for joining us.
Everything is going great for me.
That's
I
good.
Things are going
That's
pretty
all
well
that
for Joe Biden, frankly. I think he's off to a good start.
So we're coming up nearly 100 days. You've been covering politicos for a long time. Would you say this is the most successful 100 days of a president?
Oh, I don't know if I would say that. But compared to, I think in tone, it's certainly the most successful first 100 days. And a lot of that has to do with what everyone was experiencing prior to Biden's inauguration. We had the political chaos. We had the assault on the Capitol. We had a former president who was, again, continues to spread this lie that he was actually elected. And of course, you know, the global pandemic. We emerged from a place where we had tremendous surge in racial tensions. The case, the Breonna Taylor case. Fortunately, these kinds of episodes continue, and that is a huge problem for the United States and international embarrassment. But in terms of his vision for where the United States should be going and the relative calm that he is able to harness just because he's not out there hammering on Twitter and every other social media platform and going into the White House briefing room and saying all kinds of things that people are so eager to knock down. I think he's had the most peaceful opening of a 100-day period in a long time. And that counts for something.
No, 100%. I think I was like, the first 30 days, I wasn't even sure most Americans knew we had a new president because it was so seamless. But I also find Joe Biden to be one of the most comfortable presidents, certainly in my lifetime. I mean, he's been in this town for so long. He knows the in and outs of politics. He's been vice president. He's been in the Senate. I can't think of anybody more qualified to be president in my lifetime. And I certainly think the team that he brought with him has been able to hit the ground running. So I think that's probably helped in terms of like the smoothness and the calmness.
Yeah, they know what they're doing because they've been here a few times before. So that really counts for a lot. I mean, he's brought people into the business of government who have been in the business of government as opposed to all these other businesses. When Trump was elected, a lot of people went in on the Trump presidency because they said, well, you know, maybe we need somebody from the outside, somebody who's going to do business in a different way, somebody who knows how to, you sort of bought his line that he knew how to make a deal. And so when he got into office, he was surrounded by people who really sort of didn't know what they were doing. And Biden's presidency is significantly different from that. Look, 70 million people voted for him. So voted for Trump, 80 million for Biden. So Biden being the clear winner, but still, I mean, that's a lot of people to vote for the guy that you ran against. So
Team Trump certainly drove out the vote, and it was a bit of a pirate ship, bit of chaotic, but it'd be interesting. Let's transition to infrastructure. I mean, that's the Team Biden's next big priority. And it'd be really interesting. Do they have the experience and the wherewithal to get this through? I mean, we've been talking about here in the Huddle, we really think there's 4 parties operating in a 2-party system. There are a lot of different factions, even with the Democrat Party. You know, we've got our friend Joe Manchin in West Virginia, arguably the most important Joe in DC, and we're all going to be loving coal a lot more if you listen to the news reports. And then you've got the more progressive side where infrastructure is seen as a gateway to retraining, job bills, healthcare legislation. What's the sense? What should we be thinking about when it comes to infrastructure?
Look at how old Biden is. And I'm not saying this because I think he's at all mentally diminished, because I do not think that. But, in standard life terms, if he just has these 4 years, if he does not seek reelection, he's looking at accomplishing big democratic goals, because this has been his life since he was a very young man. So he's talking about doing things that are New Deal-ish. The $2 trillion infrastructure package is very much in that mold. So he's talking about major switches to renewable energies. He's talking about laying fresh infrastructure for broadband, for transit, for the grid system, for the electric grid system. It's interesting that he made his pitch for his infrastructure project to the Carpenters Union, which is a big mainstay of Democratic Party support, and a union that stands to gain hundreds of thousands of jobs if the infrastructure program goes through. So he's thinking big, and it's sort of given that if you think big, if you seek to bite off a huge amount of goals, you'll get some of them, right? Yeah. And I think that's what he's shooting for. And a lot of this infrastructure dovetails into the challenges of climate. And one of the things, for instance, that he's shooting for is creating jobs to cap oil wells and to lay grid for renewable energy sources, and to retrofit homes to be more energy efficient. So, as you say, there's more than 2 political parties, if you will, because you have the very extreme right Republicans, and you have sort of the less extreme right Republicans, and you have the very left, and they call themselves progressives. And I love these labels because that's always meant, given whatever framework you're in, progressive will mean something else. But people, for instance, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would be in this group. The Bernie Sanders people would be in the very left, and then the people who are less left in the Democratic Party. So the people who are very left say, well, it's not enough. They're not going to achieve climate goals. What they're talking about is too timid. And you have people on the far right and the kind of right in the Republican Party say, well, are you kidding? We're not going to spend $2 trillion on that. That's insane. And then in between that, you're looking at the absolute rise in the global climate and the goals that Biden and other countries around the world have for reducing the increase in global temperatures, which is a very, very significant and important goal to pitch for.
Yeah, there is a sense about this idea of like Joe, go big Biden. Like there's a sense of being liberated, maybe because he's not going to seek re-election, or maybe because he's been here for so long. And you look back to Obama, even George W. Bush. There's a bunch, there was like trying to make deals and bipartisanship. In some ways, Team Biden is like, listen, we got a small chance here. Who cares if we don't keep the House in 2022? Let's get some of these big goals through. Let's make it happen, because we're facing, in their mind, like a once in a lifetime opportunity to rebuild America, build back better, introduce new green energy, create jobs. Certainly somebody who rides the Amtrak as much as Joe Biden has certainly knows that we need new infrastructure here on the East Coast, and laying broadband across the rest of the country is really powerful. So I think it's very commendable in some ways. Even if you don't agree with it, it's nice to see a president really stepping forward and saying, hey, these are my ideas. Let's go big or go home.
The United States is not, way out there in this in its goals for the climate. The United States is seeking at least a 50% reduction in emissions by the year 2030. The UK is talking about a 68% reduction in emissions by that year, and Europe is talking about a 55% reduction in emissions by 2030. So it's not like we're way out ahead of everybody else. We're just trying to do something that's, respectable. But there are things that you have to do to be able to achieve those kinds of greenhouse emissions reductions.
Yeah, let's pivot to that, because as we're recording this, we're going to hit Earth Day later this week, and Joe Biden is going to host a 2-day conference with world leaders to, really focus on. He's calling it a climate summit. Also, we both know later this year in Glasgow, Scotland, they're going to host COP26, which is another multilateral discussion around climate. But Joe Biden wanted to be at the forefront of this, is gathering these world leaders. Can you give us a little preview about what's going to happen at this meeting?
So it's a 2-day affair. It's virtual. There are 40 world leaders that are going to be there. And interestingly enough, one of the first speakers on Thursday is going to be Vladimir Putin. And so that
Mr. Climate, Mr. Green.
That ought to be interesting. The main thing that Biden is going to have to defend is his approach to reducing the rapid rise in global temperatures. And when you talk about the international discussion about how rapidly the rise of global temperatures is, we are trying to keep it to no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. And that sounds like, oh, yeah, we could do that. So, but did you know that 1.5 degrees Celsius is 34 degrees Fahrenheit? When you think about the fact that the Earth is warming to that degree due to these greenhouse emissions, and the UN Meteorological Society just put out a report that said that we are approaching the abyss. And we are really in a dramatic place, and it's something that we cannot do alone, that one country cannot do alone. The U.S. is the second leading source of global emissions. China is the first. So we really have to be all in on this, and we have to demonstrate some leadership. And of course, we have former Secretary of State John Kerry being the climate person, the climate point person in the Biden administration. He's already started talks with China and other leaders around the world to try to achieve this. So these are things that people are looking at, because, when you talk about the rapid rise in global temperatures, you're talking about absolute quality of life issues, rising water levels, the end of certain species, a real plunge in biodiversity globally, issues of obesity and the kind of foods that people have available to them to consume, and has an absolute effect on health and well-being, not just in our country, but around the world. And the more pressure there is on climate, the more we are going to have major global movements like these very dramatic migrations we see coming out of North Africa, the kinds of dramatic migrations we see coming in at our southern border. All of these things, to one degree or another, are impacted by and to a degree caused by the problems of climate change. There's going to have to be a greater reliance on renewable energy sources like solar and wind. But how do you achieve that? Then there has to be a greater reliance on electric vehicles as opposed to fossil fuel powered vehicles. But this is something that I always wonder, Mark. So to set up these electric stations to recharge cars, which is part of the Biden plan, how do you get that electricity to those charging stations? I mean, is that coming from coal? Is that coming from, wind and solar? I mean, where is that electricity coming from? So that's something that I don't think we've figured out. And
well, it ties into infrastructure, doesn't it? Because I mean, I've worked for the mining industry. I worked for the chemical industry. I'm not very popular with my environmental woke friends, but at the end of the day, to have a modern economy, you need minerals, you need chemicals, and we have to like circle and recognize that, yeah, we do need to dig up stuff in the earth, and we need to use coal, we need to use all these different fuel sources to power a modern economy. And I think that's something that can't be discounted. And it also plays, it's interesting to me because of the politics around it with Joe Manchin and West Virginia, not only a coal state, but there's a lot of chemical refineries in that state as well. So and really, in some ways, the climate and infrastructure, to me, it's the same thing. It's really bold, I think, that Team Biden, once again, 100 days in, bringing together 40 world leaders, getting it done, really, saying we're back and we want to be a part of this. And it's also shaping, as we follow kind of international affairs, every foreign leader now, whenever they talk to Joe Biden, is talking about green jobs and environment and infrastructure. So that's super interesting.
It affects the way people live. People understand this. But what I think is interesting about it is it's very similar. The fight to actually achieve these goals in all practicality for our government to try to achieve these goals is very much like the fight to harness the global pandemic, right? Because you have always had like sort of these COVID deniers who say, you don't have to wear masks, and maybe we don't need a vaccine, or maybe the vaccine doesn't work. Oh, it's for the most part, it's survivable. So what's everybody worried about? But the same thing, you have the same kind of dynamic with the climate discussions. Look, we don't have to do that. You can talk about climate change, but we're doing okay. What are you talking about? So people have to realize that this literally for some people, and it's certainly for some organisms and for some life on Earth, it literally is life or death. This issue of getting ahead of climate change, significantly reducing global emissions, and but it's the same kind of political battle. And you look at it and you think like, why do you have to play politics with this planet? I mean, you could talk about setting up these life stations on the moon or on Mars, but how many people are going to be going to the moon or Mars?
Let's say you're a climate denier, or you're totally happy with the way the world is. Clearly, there are more efficient ways and better ways to transport humans, to move cargo, to use minerals, to use our natural resources. So I think for me, it's high time to find more efficient ways to live on this planet. Let's bring it back closer to home, though, and talk about the Chesapeake Bay, which is a great body of water, and also produces one of my favorite foods, oysters. You shot a documentary called Crisis on the Half Shell. That's some good wordsmithing there. It's all about the Chesapeake Bay. Can you talk about, how vital the oyster is to living on this planet, and what you're seeing firsthand here around the DC area, around the Chesapeake?
So the oyster, no matter where it lives, is a keystone species. It's one of the foundation species of the ocean. It not only provides habitat for lower species of animals, but when the oyster grows into a reef, it is a coastal barrier wherever it lives, and it has the ability to cleanse and oxygenate the water that it is in. So if we see a reduction in oyster populations, which we have seen around the world, then that is an alarming thing for the quality of marine life, because you are losing all of these very positive functions that the oyster provides. So we shot Crisis on the Half Shell, the Chesapeake Bay, to take a snapshot of where the Chesapeake Bay is with respect to its oyster population. And there are several states that are engaged in a federal effort to reduce the amount of waste and silt that is pouring in from tributaries that feed into the Chesapeake Bay, which is one of the largest tributaries, which is one of the largest bays of its kind around the world. While all of this pollution has been happening over the past century, the oyster has suffered greatly. It has lost its footing in an ocean that is now very muddy because of silt that comes in. And then there are other reasons why it's lost its footing. There's been tremendous overconsumption of oysters, not just here in the Chesapeake Bay region, but around the world. And what is so exciting this point in the history of this tiny little creature is that there are people, scientists around the world who are working heroically to try to rebuild oyster reefs. When you have an explosion of oyster growth in an area, the water immediately becomes more clear. And as the water becomes more clear, you also have an explosion of seagrasses, eelgrasses, which are also great. And what is the function of the eelgrass? The eelgrass has the capacity to trap carbon particles in the fronds of these eelgrasses and then pull them into the sediment of the ocean. And to that degree, they reduce the amount of carbon in the air. So that's really exciting. So these are things that the oyster can do for the planet.
The interconnectedness of all this is so important and so vital. And it's really amazing that you were able to study this, so close to here around, just 30, 40 miles from the nation's capital.
And we have to take care of the ocean. It's our heart and lungs.
Well, I'm pro-ocean. I love it. I love to spend more time on it. That's my post-COVID promise to myself. Anyways, that is fantastic. You're kind enough, not only are you the second guest to come back, a repeat performer, but you have some swag from the show. We're going to raffle off a T-shirt that you're going to maybe, I don't know, figure the rules out. We'll have to talk to our attorneys, but maybe somebody will tag it in LinkedIn and we will wrap it off there. But that's very generous of you. And everybody should check that out. It's available, right? Can you find it on the interwebs, the documentary?
Price is on the check, and it won an award at the Ocean City, Maryland Film Festival for Best Short Documentary.
I love it. You're on your way. Next stop, Hollywood. I love it.
Who knows?
Hey, before you go, we want to talk about Fritz Mondale, who passed away. You covered the 84 campaign, and before we went on camera, we were talking about, obviously it was historic because Reagan won, I think, 49 states and only lost Minnesota and the District of Columbia, but also Geraldine Ferraro was the vice presidential pick. And, Fritz Mondale seemed like a generally good guy, even though when he reached for the highest level, he came up short. He was also vice president for Jimmy Carter. I was wondering if you could share with our viewers a good Fritz Mondale story or Geraldine Ferraro story or anything good from 84.
Well, that was really dramatic when Fritz Mondale announced that Geraldine Ferraro would be his running mate. And, it was interesting because I, as an Italian-American, first-generation Italian-American woman, was really impressed by that because I think Geraldine Ferraro herself, was a first-generation Italian-American woman, and that ethnically meant something to me. One of the things that I think is impressive about Mondale, having challenged Ronald Reagan, there are a couple of things that strike me. First of all, at that convention in San Francisco, and I really sort of feel like this was the death blow to his campaign, where he said that after the election was over, people's taxes would go up. And Mondale said of Reagan, "He won't tell you, I just did." And I don't think there are many people in the United States who are really keen on voting for a guy who promises to raise their taxes. But, when you look back on the Electoral College vote count, there's a great video of Walter Mondale presiding as the, vice president in the chamber, presiding over the Electoral College vote count. And he's standing by the desk where the Electoral College vote count is announced. And it turns out that he lost 49 states. And he says to Tip O'Neill, who's next to him, he says something like, what a great turnout for my ticket, right? And he was sort of laughing at himself. And, it's just like, well, that's politics, as opposed to the drama that we saw when Trump lost the election and how that insurrection was put into place to try to deny the Electoral College vote count because he could not bear the pain of having lost. So I think that Fritz Mondale was, a man very much of his time. He was part of a Senate that was very elegant, was very devoted to duty. There was ego, all right, but, keeping in mind that it was pre-internet, pre sort of the showbiz, me that you see in politics today. And that meant a lot too.
Yeah, I know. And it's a great, what a statesman. There's that great video of him, chatting with Tip O'Neill. Losing 49 states is pretty hard to do. Think about even today's politics. It's just unbelievable. And then the dignity that he showed. And then even in his closing days, he wrote a note to his staff saying that, he was so peaceful or so thankful that Joe Biden was president. It all comes full circle. So anyways, Louise, thanks for joining us. Unbelievable discussion. We'll get you back in maybe 100 days to see how Go Big Biden is doing and where we are with infrastructure and all the other exciting developments around the world.
Thanks, Mark.
Mark, we certainly have a great time every time you speak with Louise. She is such an expert on just a bounty of topics. And, eventually we're going to have to do a live episode out on the water when we take the Huddle on the road.
I love that too. And she brought swag from her documentary. So I'm looking forward to raffling that off to some viewer of the Huddle, and they can, Instagram it, tag it, do it for the gram, put it on the boat, oysters. It's all coming together.
That's great. Well, Mark, I think that's a great introduction. We're going to phrase it a little different. Mark, who do you want to have oysters with this week in your Huddle?
I see what you did there. I'm going to go with NASA's helicopter, the experimental helicopter. Ingenuity made its first flight 118 years after the Wright brothers' first flight on not this planet, but on another planet, on Mars. What's interesting about Mars, as we know, the atmosphere is very thin. So the helicopter has to be super light. It also has to rotate at 2,500 rotations per minute. It hopped into the air 10 feet for 39 seconds. But this is the first other planet flight that humans have ever done. Pretty amazing. Hats off to NASA and Ingenuity. We look for more exciting stuff. Brendan, who is in your Huddle this week? Who will you be sharing oysters with?
This week, I am choosing Matthew McConaughey. You might know him as an actor, but is the question, is that everything? There was a poll that came out this week showing that the actor, who has not been shy about sharing his political views and said that he would consider a run for the governor's office, the polling shows that this week that if he were to challenge sitting Governor Greg Abbott, he would actually hold about a 12-point lead. Now, the question on the mind of everyone is this the kind of person who should be running the state of Texas? Well, another interesting point from the poll, though, however, is that 22% of respondents actually seem to show that they want to know why are the only two choices the sitting governor and the actor from Ed TV. The question really is, could he do a good job or just an all right one?
He's also a part owner of the FC Austin soccer team, so that's got to be worth something.
Is he the leader that could get us through some of the immigration and health challenges that we're seeing down in the state of Texas? Maybe he would throw out that first pitch when Governor Greg Abbott didn't want to do it.
Come on, man. It's no time to be asking policy prescriptions from our political leaders. It's all about personality. It's all about doing it for the gram.
Get me some infrastructure. That's all I'm thinking about.
Well, Brendan, this is great. Episode 16 in the books. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll be back next week for more Inner Circle analysis on The Huddle.